I'm standing in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, wearing a dress that cost more than my first year of graduate research funding and trying to remember how to breathe. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the Evergreen Conservatory, a glass cathedral of a building perched on the edge of the Northern Sea. My colleagues from the Marine Institute filled the left side of the aisle. His business partners and tech investors filled the right. The string quartet had finished their second prelude. The officiant kept checking his watch, and I stood at the back in my ivory gown, watching the doors not open. An hour passed, then 2. My maid of honor, Celine, came back from making calls, her face pale. "He's not coming," she said. "His communicator is offline. His transport is still at his apartment. There's no message. There's no explanation. There's nothing." I didn't cry at the venue. I didn't cry in the transport on the way back to the apartment we were supposed to share. I didn't cry when I peeled off the dress and hung it in the closet like a costume I had worn for a role I didn't get. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, and felt something inside me calcify. His name was Aldrich. We had been together 4 years. He proposed during a winter expedition on the ice shelf under the Aurora, with a ring he had designed himself. He said I was the only constant in his life. He said he couldn't imagine a future without me in it. Then he simply didn't show up. The days that followed were quiet, in a way that felt like drowning in slow motion. I stopped answering my research column. I stopped reading the news. I packed my belongings into a single cargo crate and resigned from the Institute. I told my supervisor I needed time away from everything I knew. She looked at me with the particular sympathy of someone who had already heard what happened. "Take as long as you need, Lyra," she said. "The ocean will still be here when you're ready." I wasn't sure I would ever be ready. I drove north along the coast until the sprawl of the research hubs gave way to rocky headlands, and the air turned sharp with salt and ice. I told myself I was leaving because there was nothing left for me in the city. The truth is, I was running away from the crushing weight of being the woman everyone pitied. The listing appeared on my tablet 3 days into my aimless journey. Household manager sought. Remote coastal estate. 1 child. Single father. Room and board included. Compensation competitive. Discretion required. The estate was perched on a granite cliff above a private cove, accessible only by a winding road that cut through dense forest. The main house was built of gray stone and dark timber, designed by someone who valued permanence over fashion. Massive windows faced the sea. A glass conservatory jutted from the western wing. The gardens were immaculate, but somehow cold, as if they had been arranged by someone who understood aesthetics, but not warmth. The man who opened the door was tall, with dark hair threaded with gray at the temples, and eyes the color of winter storm clouds. He wore a simple gray sweater with the sleeves pushed up, and he looked at me with the measured caution of someone who had learned not to trust first impressions. "You must be Lyra," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Kael Ashford." He stepped aside to let me enter. "This is a position, nothing more. I expect professionalism and discretion. My son does not adapt well to change. His previous caregiver lasted less than 3 months. If you cannot commit to consistency, this will not work for any of us." "I understand." He studied me for a moment longer, as if weighing whether I meant it. Then he nodded once. "Your quarters are in the East Wing. You'll receive the household protocols on your tablet. Dinner is at 6. That was the entirety of our first conversation. I didn't unpack everything that night. My duffel stayed half open on the floor of the small but beautifully appointed room. The windows faced the sea, and I could hear the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. The house was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the careful kind. The kind where every sound felt controlled, measured, held at a deliberate distance. Down the corridor, I heard soft footsteps. The child appeared in my doorway. He was perhaps 6 years old, small for his age, with dark curls and eyes that seemed to absorb everything without giving anything back. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my chest ache. I knelt down slowly, keeping my hands visible, my posture open. "Hello," I said. "My name is Lyra." He didn't respond. He looked past me toward the hallway, as if checking whether his father was observing. Then he looked back at me again. I didn't push. I had learned the hard way that trust does not respond well to pressure. After a long moment, he nodded once, a tiny, barely perceptible movement. Then he turned and padded back down the corridor toward his room.
The next morning, I woke before the house. I dressed simply, choosing practicality over appearance. In the kitchen, I followed the protocols Kael had sent. Nothing elaborate, nothing presumptuous, just a simple breakfast arranged neatly on the table. The child, Finn, I had learned his name from the household file, sat at the table with his feet swinging slightly beneath the chair. He ate without complaint, but without enthusiasm. He avoided eye contact. His movements were careful and restrained, as if he had learned not to take up too much space. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to entertain him. I simply stayed present. After breakfast, I helped him prepare for his morning lessons. He had a tutor who came 3 times a week, but today was a self-study day. He hesitated when I reached toward his tablet, then relaxed when I stepped back and let him pick it up himself. A small adjustment, a small victory. Kael left for the city before we finished eating. He ran a tech empire from a remote office connected by satellite and secured networks. He was present in the house, but always partially elsewhere, his attention divided between his son and the demands of an industry that never slept. The morning passed slowly. Finn and I read in the conservatory. I worked on a small research paper I had agreed to complete before leaving the institute. He drew pictures of sea creatures, whales mostly, with intricate details that suggested he had studied them extensively. "You like the ocean," I said. He didn't look up. "I used to work there," I continued, "under the water, studying the creatures that live in the deep." His pencil paused. After a moment, he turned the page and began drawing a new creature, something with long tentacles and expressive eyes. "Is that a squid?" He nodded once. "It's beautiful." He didn't smile, but he didn't pull away either. That evening, Kael returned later than expected. I heard him speaking with someone on his comm in the study, his voice low and controlled. When he emerged, he found me in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. "Finn ate well tonight," I said. He paused. He usually picks at his food. "We talked about marine life. He knows more about deep-sea creatures than most of my graduate students." Kael studied me for a long moment. "You were the first person he's spoken to in 6 months," he said finally. I didn't know how to respond to that. "His mother died when he was 3, Kael continued, his voice carefully neutral. "She was a marine geologist. She studied the same things you did. I think that's why he hasn't run away from you yet." He turned and walked away before I could form a reply.
That night, I lay awake, listening to the sea and thinking about a woman who had studied the deep ocean, a woman whose son now drew whales and squids on endless sheets of paper as if trying to communicate with a ghost. I thought about Finn's careful, watchful silence. I thought about Kael's controlled grief, hidden beneath layers of discipline and routine. And for the first time since Aldrich had disappeared from my life, I felt something other than numbness. I felt like I understood. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm as predictable as the tides. Mornings began with breakfast in the conservatory. Finn would eat in silence while I read aloud from research journals or told him stories about my expeditions. He never responded verbally, but he started sitting closer, his shoulders sometimes brushing my arm. Afternoons were for lessons and projects. We built a small hydroponic garden in the conservatory. We assembled a model of the solar system from recycled materials. We cataloged every species of shorebird that nested on the cliffs below the estate. Finn began to ask questions, small ones at first. What do sea turtles eat? Why is the ocean salty? Can octopuses really open jars? Then larger ones. Did you ever see a whale up close? Do you miss the ocean? Why did you stop working there? I answered as honestly as I could. I said I needed a break from the life I had before. I said sometimes people leave without explaining why, and it takes a long time to recover. He absorbed this without comment. One afternoon, during a particularly violent storm, Finn climbed onto the sofa beside me and pressed himself against my side. I wrapped an arm around it without thinking. "You're safe," I said. "The storm can't reach us here." He didn't respond, but his small hand found mine and held on. Kael found us like that hours later. Finn had fallen asleep against my shoulder. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and brilliant with stars. Kael stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at us. I braced myself for a comment about boundaries, about professionalism, about the limits of my role. Instead, he said, He hasn't let anyone hold him since his mother died. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me with a sleeping child and a heart full of something I couldn't name.
Something shifted between Kael and me after that night. He began arriving home earlier. He started joining us for dinner instead of eating alone in his study. He asked me questions about my research, about the ocean, about the life I had left behind. One evening, after Finn was asleep, I found Kael in the conservatory, staring at the hydroponic garden we had built. "He tells me things," Kael said without turning around. "About his day, about the creatures he's learning about you. He's a curious child." "He's a lonely child," Kael corrected gently. "He has been lonely since his mother died, and I didn't know how to fix it. I thought I could manage it the way I manage a company. Structure, discipline, clear expectations. That's not how children work." "No," he agreed, "it's not." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were softer than I had ever seen them. "You've done something I couldn't do," he said. "You've given him permission to feel things again." I shook my head. "I didn't do anything special. I just stayed." He nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I mean." The silence stretched between us, comfortable rather than awkward. "His mother loved this room," Kael said eventually. "She used to sit here for hours reading her research papers. She said the light was best in the afternoon." "What was her name?" "Alara," he said, the word like a prayer. "Her name was Alara." I didn't push for more. I understood that grief had its own timeline. "She would have liked you," he added quietly. Then he left the room before I could respond. Finn's 7th birthday arrived on a brilliant spring morning. Kael had arranged a small celebration. No elaborate parties, no crowds of unfamiliar children. Just the 3 of us, a homemade cake, and a pile of carefully wrapped gifts. Finn opened a telescope first, then a collection of preserved deep-sea specimens, donated by the Marine Institute at my request. Then a small hand-drawn book about a squid who made friends with a whale. The book was mine. I had worked on it for weeks. Finn studied every page with intense concentration. When he finished, he looked up at me. "This is the best present," he said clearly. Later that night, after Finn was asleep, Kael found me in the conservatory. "You drew that book yourself." "Yes." "You researched every species and you wrote it at his reading level." I wanted him to have something special. Kael sat down across from me. "I've been thinking about something," he said, "for weeks now, maybe longer." "What?" "About what happens when you leave." I opened my mouth to respond, but he continued before I could. "I know you didn't come here to stay forever. I know you have a career and a life to return to. But Finn has never connected with anyone the way he's connected with you, and He paused. "I've forgotten what it feels like to have someone in this house who makes it feel less empty." "I'm not leaving," I said. He looked at me sharply. "Not yet, but someday." I thought about Aldrich, about the wedding that never happened, about the promises that turned to dust. "I don't know what happens someday," I admitted. "I used to think I did. I used to think I could plan everything and control everything and make people stay by being good enough. But people leave. Sometimes they leave without explanation. And I can't promise that I won't be one of them because I don't trust my own judgment anymore." Kael leaned forward. "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "I'm asking for honesty. If you decide to leave, tell me. Don't disappear. Don't leave him wondering what he did wrong." The words hit harder than I expected. "Is that what Alara did?" He flinched, almost imperceptibly. "No," he said. "She didn't leave by choice. But the effect was the same. One day she was here, and the next she was gone. And Finn, he didn't understand. He thought she had abandoned him." "He still thinks that." I reached across the space between us and took his hand. "I can't promise I'll stay forever," I said. "But I can promise I won't disappear without a word. Whatever happens, I'll say goodbye properly." He nodded slowly. "That's all I'm asking." The crisis arrived without warning. I received a message from Solon, my former colleague at the Institute. There was a new deep-sea expedition being organized, a 6-month mission to study hydrothermal vents in the Southern Ocean. They needed an experienced marine biologist. The position was mine if I wanted it. 6 months. That was a significant commitment. I stared at the message for 3 days without responding. Finn noticed something was wrong immediately. "You're quiet," he said at breakfast on the 3rd day. "I'm thinking about something." "Are you leaving?" The question landed like a physical blow. I put down my utensils and turned to face him fully. "There's an expedition," I said carefully. "A research mission to study underwater volcanoes. It would last for half a year." He absorbed this in silence. "Would you come back?" "Yes, I would come back. The expedition has an end date. When it's over, I would return." He nodded slowly. "Is it important?" "Very important," I said. "It's the kind of work I used to do before I came here. It could help us understand how life survives in the most extreme environments on Earth." He was quiet for a long moment. "You should go," he said finally. My heart cracked. "Finn!" "You should go," he repeated. "Because it's important, and because you want to, and because—" he swallowed hard. "Because when you come back, we'll still be here." I knelt down and pulled him into my arms. "You are the bravest person I have ever known," I whispered. He hugged me back fiercely. That evening, I told Kael about the expedition. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stood up and walked to the window. 6 months? Yes. Is it dangerous? There are risks, I admitted, but I've done similar missions before. The safety protocols are rigorous. He turned to face me. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "Really?" I thought about lying. I thought about giving the professional answer, about needing a change of pace. Instead, I told the truth. "I was supposed to get married," I said, 6 months before I arrived here. He didn't show up. No explanation, no apology, no goodbye. I waited for 2 hours in my wedding dress before I understood he wasn't coming. Kael's expression tightened. After that, I stopped trusting anything. I stopped believing people meant what they said. I came here because I thought taking care of a child would be simpler than facing my own life. I thought if I focused on someone else's needs, I wouldn't have to think about my own. And did it work? For a while, I admitted. But the problem with taking care of someone else is that eventually you start to care. And caring means opening yourself up to loss again. Kael crossed the room and sat down across from me. "When Lyra died," he said quietly, "I thought my life was over. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing I could control. I kept Finn at a distance because I was terrified of losing him too." "What changed?" "You," he said simply. "You arrived, and you treated him like a person instead of a problem to be managed. You showed me that protecting him meant being present, not being absent." I thought about his words for a long moment. "I'm afraid," I said, "of going on this expedition, of leaving what we've built here, of coming back and finding that everything has changed." "Change isn't always loss," Kael said. "Sometimes it's growth. Sometimes it's the thing that makes us stronger." "You sound like a fortune cookie." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "I've been practicing." The night before I left for the expedition, Finn gave me a drawing. It showed 3 figures standing together on the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. One tall, one small, one in between. Above them, the sky was filled with stars, and a single whale tail broke the surface of the waves. "This is us," he said. "When you come back, we'll still be us." I folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into my travel case. "I'll bring you a rock from the bottom of the ocean," I promised. "Make it a weird one, the weirdest one I can find." Kael drove me to the Institute's departure point on a gray, misty morning. We stood in the parking lot, surrounded by research equipment and expedition personnel. "I should say something profound," he said. "Please don't." "Good, because I'm terrible at profound." I laughed. "Take care of Finn." "I will. And take care of yourself." He looked at me, and his expression was serious now. "You've given us something I thought we had lost forever," he said. "You've given us hope. That's not something I take lightly." I reached up and touched his face. "When I come back," I said,
We should talk about what happens next. I would like that. I nodded once, then turned and walked toward the research vessel.
The expedition was everything I had hoped it would be. The hydrothermal vents were more active than any we had previously documented. The biological samples we collected included 3 potentially new species. I worked 16-hour days and fell into my bunk exhausted and satisfied. But every night I looked at Finn's drawing, and every night I thought about the house on the cliff and the conservatory full of hydroponic plants and a man who had learned to smile again. 6 months passed. The research vessel docked on a cold autumn morning. I was one of the first off the ship. Kael and Finn were waiting at the end of the pier. Finn ran toward me with a speed that made my heart ache. He threw himself into my arms and I lifted him off the ground. "You came back!" I promised I would. He pulled back and studied my face. "Did you bring the rock?" I reached into my pocket and produced a small fragment of basalt covered in fossilized tube worms, the weirdest one I could find. He took it reverently. "This is amazing." Kael approached more slowly. His eyes were warm and his smile was the real one. "Welcome home." "Is that what this is?" He reached out and took my hand. "I think it could be," he said, "if you want it to be." I looked at Finn, who was still examining the rock. I looked at Kael, whose hand was warm and steady around mine. I thought about the wedding that never happened, about the man who had disappeared without explanation, about the years I had spent believing I was unworthy of being chosen. Then I thought about the 2 people standing in front of me who had chosen me anyway. "Yes," I said, "I want it to be." Finn looked up from his rock. "Does this mean you're staying?" I knelt down to his level. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, "unless there's another weird rock expedition, in which case you're both coming with me." Finn threw his arms around my neck. "Best day ever!" That evening we sat in the conservatory watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and rose. Finn fell asleep on the sofa between us, his head resting on my lap. Kael reached over and took my hand. "I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford," he said. "A vulnerability I couldn't allow myself. But loving you hasn't made me weaker. It's made me stronger." I squeezed his hand. "Love isn't about never being hurt," I said. "It's about finding someone worth the risk,